Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Alexander Knowles stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his downtown office, watching the Seattle skyline glitter in the morning light. At 35, he had built an empire from nothing. Knowles Security Solutions was now the premier private military contractor on the West Coast. His hands, scarred from years of combat as a Navy SEAL, gripped his coffee mug as he reviewed the day's contracts. Another government job came in, Todd Taylor announced, striding into the office without knocking. At 33, Todd was Alexander's business partner and closest friend since their SEAL days. Where Alexander was methodical and calculating, Todd was impulsive and charming, a perfect complement in both business and war. Alexander turned, noting the excitement in Todd's eyes. What kind of job? Extraction mission. American diplomat's daughter kidnapped in Syria. Government can't officially intervene, but they're willing to pay 8 figures for her safe return. Todd dropped the classified folder on Alexander's mahogany desk. They specifically requested you lead the team. Alexander had earned his reputation through 12 years of flawless service. 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Medal of Honor adorned his office wall, testaments to battles fought in Afghanistan, Iraq, and classified operations across 3 continents. But those days were behind him now. He had Christina to think about. I'll send Mitchell Carey's team, Alexander decided. I'm not taking field ops anymore. Todd's expression shifted, disappointment flickering across his features. Come on, Alex. This is exactly the kind of mission that built our reputation. The client specifically wants the legendary Alexander Knowles. The legendary Alexander Knowles wants to stay alive for his wife. Alexander's tone was final. Besides, Christina and I are planning a trip to Europe next month. 8 years of marriage, and I've never taken her to Paris. The truth was more complicated. Alexander had seen too many good soldiers die for causes that politicians later abandoned. He'd built his company to give operators like himself a choice. Fight for contracts that mattered, get paid what they were worth, and retire with all their limbs intact. Speaking of Christina, Todd said, his voice taking on a strange quality, how is she handling your career change? She's relieved I'm not getting shot at anymore. Alexander smiled, thinking of his wife's beautiful face when he'd announced his retirement from active operations 6 months ago. Christina Werner had been the investment banker who'd financed his company's initial expansion. Their courtship had been a whirlwind, brilliant conversations, passionate nights, and a wedding that made the society pages. Must be nice having a wife who understands the business, Todd continued. Mine would probably sell our location to the enemy for a spa day. Alexander laughed, but something in Todd's comment sat strangely. Christina's not like that. She knew what she was getting into when she married me. Todd's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and Alexander caught a flash of something. Guilt? Panic? Before Todd's usual grin returned. Speaking of wives, I should get home. Dinner plans with the family. After Todd left, Alexander remained at his window, watching the sun set over Elliott Bay. His office phone rang, Christina's office number. Hey, beautiful, he answered. Ready for dinner? I made reservations at that place you love. I have to work late tonight. Christina's voice sounded strained. The Morrison account is exploding, and the partners need me to handle the damage control. Again, Alexander frowned. This was the 4th time this month. Christina, you've been working 60-hour weeks. When's the last time we had dinner together? I know. I'm sorry, Alex. Just give me 2 more weeks to get through this deal. Then we can plan that Paris trip, okay? Something in her voice, too bright, too forced, made Alexander's trained instincts prickle. But he pushed the feeling down. This was Christina, not some enemy operative. All right, I love you. Love you too. After hanging up, Alexander decided to surprise her with dinner at the office. Christina's investment firm occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown tower. Alexander knew the security guard and could easily get to the 32nd floor where Christina worked. But when he arrived at Morrison & Associates at 8 p.m., the building was dark. The security desk confirmed what Alexander's gut already knew. No one from the investment firm had been in the building past 6. Alexander sat in his car in the parking garage, staring at his phone. Christina's location services showed her iPhone at their Bellevue home, but she just told him she was working late downtown. For the first time in 8 years of marriage, Alexander began to doubt his wife. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. Alexander spent the next week observing patterns. Christina claimed late nights 4 times, but each time, her phone placed her at home, at the gym, or at locations she never mentioned. When he casually asked about her Morrison account work, she provided vague details that didn't match the firm's actual client roster, information Alexander could access through his security company's financial connections. On Thursday evening, Alexander decided to follow her. Christina kissed him goodbye at 6 p.m., claiming another late night. Alexander waited 15 minutes, then tracked her BMW using the GPS system he'd installed for security purposes. Instead of heading downtown, Christina drove to a luxury apartment complex in Kirkland, the Meridian, known for housing Seattle's young tech elite. Alexander parked across the street and watched through binoculars as Christina entered the building using a key card. She knew the access codes. This wasn't a client meeting. His phone buzzed with a text. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." Alexander photographed the timestamp and Christina's location. 7 months of supposed late nights suddenly made sense. His wife wasn't having an affair with a stranger. She was having an affair with someone who knew their schedule, their security, their lives. The next morning, Alexander hired a private investigator named Raphael Clark, a former FBI agent who owed him favors from their military contractor days. Within 48 hours, Raphael had answers. The apartment belongs to Todd Taylor, Raphael reported in Alexander's office Monday morning. He's been leasing it for 8 months under an LLC. Your wife has been photographed entering and leaving at least 3 times a week for the past 6 months. Alexander stared at the surveillance photos spread across his desk. Christina laughing in Todd's arms. Christina kissing Todd at the apartment's balcony. Christina wearing lingerie Alexander had never seen as she closed the bedroom curtains. "There's more," Raphael continued grimly. "I ran a deeper background check on Taylor. His financial records show some interesting patterns. Large cash deposits that don't match his stated income from your company. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Wire transfers from shell companies. How much money are we talking about? Conservative estimate? $2 million in the past year. Alex, either Todd's running side operations you don't know about, or someone's paying him for information about your business." Alexander's blood chilled. Knoll Security Solutions handled classified contracts. They knew government operation schedules, diplomat movements, military contractor activities. In the wrong hands, that information was worth millions to hostile foreign governments. "I need you to dig deeper. Find out who's paying Todd and what information he's selling." Alexander's voice was deadly calm. "And Raphael? Keep this completely confidential. Tell no one." After Raphael left, Alexander sat alone in his office, pieces of a horrifying puzzle assembling in his mind. Todd had access to all their company's contracts. He knew which missions Alexander might personally take. He knew their security protocols, their government contacts, their operational procedures. 8 months ago, Todd had started pushing Alexander to take more dangerous field operations. The Syria extraction job wasn't the first. Todd had been suggesting increasingly risky missions, each time specifically requesting Alexander lead the team personally. Alexander opened his secure laptop and accessed their contract database. Over the past 8 months, Todd had recommended 7 high-risk operations in hostile territories. Alexander had turned down all of them, sending other team leaders instead. But what if one day Alexander said yes? His secure phone rang, a government number. "Knowles. Mr. Knowles, this is Colonel Marcus Hand, JSOC. We have a situation requiring immediate attention. American journalist captured by insurgents in Afghanistan. The State Department needs plausible deniability for an extraction." Alexander felt ice in his veins. "What's the timeline?" "Wheels up in 6 hours. "And Mr. Knowles?" "The journalist is Jonathan Knowles. I believe he's your brother." Alexander's younger brother had left the SEALs 2 years ago to become a war correspondent. Jonathan was fearless, idealistic, and currently being held by the same insurgent network that had cost Alexander 3 good men on his last official mission. "I'll take the job," Alexander heard himself say. "Excellent. Todd Taylor has already volunteered to handle support logistics from your end. Seems he specifically requested to coordinate this operation." Alexander hung up, his mind racing. Todd knew about Jonathan's capture before Alexander did. Todd had volunteered for support logistics, meaning he'd know Alexander's exact route, timing, and extraction plans. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was a trap. Chapter 3. The Setup. Alexander had 4 hours to prepare for what he now understood was an assassination attempt orchestrated by his best friend and his wife. The smart move would be to decline the mission and expose Todd's betrayal. But Jonathan was still in enemy hands, and Alexander never left a man behind, especially not his brother. Instead, Alexander began planning his own trap. He called Mitchell Carey, his most trusted team leader, on a secure line. "Mitchell, I need you to assemble a shadow team, completely off the books. Don't tell Todd or anyone else at the company. What's the situation? I'm being set up. The Afghanistan extraction is a trap, but my brother is the target, so I have to go. I need you to follow 48 hours behind with a cleanup crew." Alexander spent the next 3 hours creating false operational plans to feed Todd while developing his real strategy. He installed hidden tracking devices in his gear and created dummy communication protocols. Most importantly, he recorded a detailed video confession explaining Todd and Christina's betrayal, to be released if he didn't return. At the final briefing, Todd was unusually eager to review Alexander's mission parameters. "Standard extraction protocol?" Todd asked, taking notes. "Modified. I'll be going alone first to assess the situation." Alexander fed Todd false coordinates, false timing, and false extraction routes. "Can you coordinate with our government contact to ensure air support is positioned correctly?" "Absolutely." Todd's eyes gleamed. "I'll make sure everyone knows exactly where you'll be." Alexander boarded the transport plane with murder in his heart. Whoever Todd was working for would be expecting Alexander at the wrong coordinates at the wrong time. Meanwhile, Alexander would be hitting the real target location with backup plans Todd couldn't sabotage. But 14 hours later, as Alexander parachuted into the Afghan mountains, he realized his calculations had been wrong. The insurgents were waiting at the correct coordinates. They knew his real plan, not the false one he'd given Todd, which meant the leak wasn't just Todd. As enemy fire erupted around his landing zone, Alexander understood with crystal clarity that his betrayal went deeper than he'd imagined. Someone else in his inner circle was feeding information to his enemies. Someone who had access to his real plans. Someone he trusted completely. Alexander hit the ground running, bullets whining past his ears, his faith in everyone he'd ever loved shattered like glass. Chapter 4. The Cage. The cell was a concrete box 8 feet by 6 feet, carved into the mountainside like a tomb. Alexander had been their prisoner for 6 days, beaten daily by interrogators demanding information about American military operations. His left eye was swollen shut, 3 ribs were cracked, and his hands were raw from the zip ties that bound them behind his back. But Alexander Knowles had endured worse. He focused on survival, on gathering intelligence, on waiting for the opportunity that always came if you were patient enough. The insurgent compound was smaller than expected, maybe 20 fighters total. They moved with the discipline of former military, not the chaotic energy of typical militants. Someone was training them. Someone was funding them. Someone with intimate knowledge of American special operations. On the 7th night, Alexander heard voices outside his cell speaking English. "The transfer goes through tomorrow," a man's voice said. American accent, educated. "Once Knowles breaks, we'll have everything we need about their government contracts. And if he doesn't break?" Another voice, also American. "Then we kill him and blame the insurgents. Either way, the objectives are met." Alexander pressed his ear to the concrete wall, straining to identify the speakers. But the voices moved away before he could gather more intelligence. On the 8th night, everything changed. Alexander was lying on the filthy floor when he heard the distinctive sound of an encrypted satellite phone connecting. The The guard outside his cell was speaking in hushed tones, but in the mountain silence, every word carried. "You wire the rest." A woman's voice crackled through the phone speaker. Alexander's blood turned to ice. He knew that voice. Good. Make sure he never leaves that camp. It was Christina, his wife, his partner of 8 years. The woman who'd held him after nightmares, who'd celebrated every business success, who'd promised to love him until death. Alexander pressed himself against the wall, his heart hammering as the conversation continued. "What about the brother?" the guard asked. "Kill him too, if necessary. We can't have loose ends." The call ended, leaving Alexander alone with the magnitude of his wife's betrayal. This wasn't just about money or adultery. Christina and Todd had sold him to enemy forces. They'd arranged for his capture, his torture, his murder, and they were willing to kill Jonathan to cover their tracks. Alexander closed his eyes and began to plan. Not escape, that would come later. He began to plan revenge. The next morning brought a new horror. Alexander's cell door opened, and a figure stepped into the dim light. Gray hair, weathered face, expensive tactical gear that looked out of place in the mountain compound. "Hello, son." Edwin Werner, Christina's father. The man who'd walked her down the aisle 8 years ago. The man who'd welcomed Alexander into the family with firm handshakes and fishing trips. Edwin knelt beside Alexander's bound form, producing a combat knife that glinted in the pale light filtering through the cell's barred window. "Shouldn't have married my daughter," Edwin sneered, pressing the blade to Alexander's neck. "She'll be rich when you're gone." Alexander stared into the eyes of his father-in-law, understanding dawning like a sick sunrise. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. This had been planned for years. Christina's marriage to him, Todd's friendship, their business partnership, all of it had been orchestrated to get close to Alexander's government connections. "You want to know the beautiful part?" Edwin whispered, the knife drawing a thin line of blood. "Christina never loved you. Not for a single day. You were always just a mark." Through his swollen eyes, Alexander saw a shadow move behind Edwin. A figure in black tactical gear, moving with the silent precision of a predator. Jonathan, his younger brother, had found him. Jonathan held a finger to his lips, silenced pistol aimed at Edwin's head. Alexander's heart thundered with hope and rage. His brother had come. The one person in the world who hadn't betrayed him. The one person who still gave a damn whether Alexander Knowles lived or died. But as Alexander met Jonathan's eyes across the cell, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Jonathan wasn't looking at Edwin with the focus of a rescuer. He was looking at Alexander with the cold calculation of an executioner. Chapter 5, Blood Brothers. "Hello, brother." Jonathan's voice was steady, professional. The same tone he'd used on 100 missions together. But the silenced pistol in his hands wasn't aimed at Edwin Werner. It was aimed directly at Alexander's chest. "You took long enough, T.O. Get here," Edwin said without turning around. "I was starting to think the plan had failed." "Traffic was heavy," Jonathan replied with cold humor. "Is he ready for transport?" Alexander's mind reeled. Jonathan, his younger brother, the man he'd trained, protected, and loved more than anyone in the world except Christina. Jonathan was part of the conspiracy. "Wait," Alexander croaked through his swollen throat. "Jonathan, what the hell?" "Shut up." Jonathan snapped his weapon steady. "You have no idea how long I've waited for this moment." Edwin stood, wiping blood from his knife. "Your brother never forgave you for Dad's death, Alexander." Funny how grief can motivate people. Their father, Colonel Philip Knowles, had died in a helicopter crash during Alexander's second deployment. Alexander had requested emergency leave to attend the funeral, but his commanding officer had denied it due to an ongoing operation. Alexander had chosen duty over family, a decision that had haunted him for 15 years. "Jonathan, I tried to come home," Alexander said desperately. "They wouldn't let me leave the mission. You know I wanted to be there." "You always had a choice." Jonathan's voice was ice. "You chose the mission over family. You chose glory over being there when Dad was lowered into the ground. Mom cried for 3 days waiting for you to show up. So you decided to kill me?" Jonathan's laugh was bitter. Kill you? Alexander, this is so much better than killing you. We're going to destroy everything you've built, everything you love, and then we're going to let you live with the consequences. Edwin checked his watch. The extraction team arrives in 2 hours. Are we ready for phase 2? Christina's already initiated the business transfer, Jonathan confirmed. By tomorrow, Knowles Security Solutions will be renamed Werner Taylor Enterprises. Your company, your contracts, your reputation, all of it belongs to us now. Alexander felt the world spinning. The business partnership agreement gives Todd controlling interest if you're declared dead or mentally incompetent, Jonathan finished. And Christina, as your wife, inherits your personal shares. Combined with my testimony that you've been exhibiting signs of PTSD and dangerous behavior, the courts will have no choice but to declare you unfit. This has been years in the planning, Edwin added with satisfaction. Christina researched you for 6 months before that chance meeting at the bank. She knew exactly what kind of man would fall for her act. Alexander closed his eyes, seeing his marriage with horrible clarity. Christina's enthusiasm for his war stories, her interest in his business operations, her encouragement to take on riskier contracts, all of it calculated manipulation. The beautiful part, Jonathan continued, is that everyone will believe it. The war hero who finally cracked under pressure. The loving wife who tried to help but couldn't save him from his demons. The business partner forced to take control to protect their clients. And me? Alexander asked. You'll be found wandering the Afghan mountains, clearly suffering from a psychotic break. The military will quietly retire you with a medical discharge. Christina will play the grieving wife who's moving on with Todd, your former best friend who's helping her heal. Alexander stared at his brother, really looked at him. Jonathan's eyes held 15 years of accumulated resentment, carefully nurtured into hatred. This wasn't about money or business. This was about a younger brother who'd felt abandoned when he needed family most. Jonathan, Alexander said quietly, I'm sorry about Dad's funeral. I'm sorry I wasn't there. But I never stopped loving you. For just a moment, something flickered in Jonathan's eyes. Doubt, pain, the echo of the brothers they'd once been. Then Edwin Werner stepped between them. Save the sentiment. You had 15 years to apologize. Now it's too late. Edwin raised his knife again, but this time he was looking at Jonathan, not Alexander. Wait, Jonathan said. That wasn't part of the plan. Plans change. Edwin smiled coldly. You think I'm going to let you live with knowledge of this operation? You're as much a liability as he is. Jonathan's training kicked in. He spun toward Edwin, but the older man was ready. The knife caught Jonathan in the ribs, sliding between bones with surgical precision. Alexander watched his brother collapse, blood pooling beneath him. Whatever Jonathan had done, whatever he'd planned, he was still Alexander's little brother. And Alexander Knowles never left family behind. Chapter 6, Resurrection. The zip ties binding Alexander's wrists had been slowly fraying against the rough concrete wall for 8 days. When Edwin Werner bent over Jonathan's bleeding form, Alexander made his move. The ties snapped. Alexander surged upward, driving his shoulder into Edwin's midsection. They crashed into the cell wall, Alexander's hands wrapping around Edwin's throat. You made one mistake, Alexander growled as Edwin's face turned purple. You assumed I'd stay broken. Edwin clawed at Alexander's hands, but 8 days of torture had only focused Alexander's rage. This was the man who'd orchestrated his destruction, who'd turned his wife against him, who'd just stabbed his brother. Edwin's windpipe collapsed with a satisfying crunch. Alexander caught Jonathan as his brother slumped against the wall, blood seeping through his tactical gear. Alex, Jonathan whispered, his face pale with shock and blood loss. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Save your strength. Alexander pressed his hands against the wound. The knife had missed major organs, but Jonathan was losing blood fast. We're getting out of here. No. Jonathan shook his head weakly. Listen to me. There's more. The compound, it's rigged with explosives. Insurance policy. If you escape, they'll detonate everything and blame the explosion on an American airstrike. Alexander processed this information coldly. Where are the detonators? Command bunker. North side of the compound. But Alex, there are 20 fighters between here and there. Then I'd better hurry. Alexander stripped Edwin's body of weapons and gear. The old man had been carrying military-grade equipment, encrypted radio, tactical knife, and a custom .45 that Alexander recognized as Special Forces issue. Jonathan, I need you to stay alive for 10 more minutes. Can you do that? His brother nodded weakly. What are you going to do? What I should have done 15 years ago. Choose family over everything else. Alexander slipped from the cell into the mountain compound's labyrinthine corridors. The insurgents had grown careless over 8 days, assuming their prisoner was broken. Alexander used that overconfidence against them. The first guard died silently, Alexander's hands snapping his neck from behind. The second guard managed a surprise shout before Alexander's knife found his heart. By the third kill, Alexander had recovered his captured gear and was moving like the predator he'd been trained to be. The command bunker was exactly where Jonathan had said it would be. For men inside, hunched over radio equipment and monitoring stations. Alexander studied their positions through the doorway, calculating angles and timing. He'd done this 1,000 times in a dozen countries, but never for stakes this personal. Alexander entered the bunker like death itself. When the shooting stopped, Alexander stood among 4 corpses, breathing heavily, covered in other men's blood. He found the detonator controls and systematically disabled the explosive charges throughout the compound. Then he began the real work. Alexander accessed the communication equipment and began downloading files. Financial records, communication logs, video footage of planning meetings. Everything he needed to identify every person involved in the conspiracy against him. What he found was worse than he'd imagined. The conspiracy included Todd and Christina, obviously. Edwin Werner had been the financial backer. Jonathan had provided intelligence about Alexander's psychology and family vulnerabilities. But there were others. Government contacts who'd leaked classified information. Business competitors who'd funded the operation to acquire Alexander's contracts. Foreign agents who'd paid millions for access to American military intelligence. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was treason on a massive scale. Alexander uploaded everything to secure servers he controlled, then started a timer on the compound's own demolition charges. He had 20 minutes to get Jonathan out before the mountain became a crater. He found his brother where he'd left him, barely conscious but alive. Time to go, Alexander said, lifting Jonathan onto his shoulders. Alex, Jonathan whispered as they moved through the compound corridors. The apology? I'm in it. I've hated you for 15 years for something that wasn't your fault. We'll talk about it when we're safe. Will you forgive me? Alexander paused at the compound's exit, looking out at the Afghan mountains where an extraction helicopter would be waiting. Behind them, 15 minutes remained on the demolition timer. Ahead lay a future where Alexander would have to decide what justice looked like. I forgive you, Alexander said finally, but I'll never forgive them. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. What are you going to do? Alexander's smile was cold as winter steel. I'm going to go home and show Christina and Todd what happens when you betray Knowles. The explosion that consumed the compound could be seen for 30 miles. Official reports would blame the destruction on a successful American military strike against insurgent forces. No one would ever know that Alexander Knowles had single-handedly dismantled the network that betrayed him. But that was just the beginning. Chapter 7. The Homecoming. 3 weeks later, Alexander Knowles stood in the shadow of Seattle's Space Needle, watching his own memorial service through binoculars. The official story was perfect. Alexander had died heroically rescuing his brother from insurgent forces. Jonathan had survived with selective amnesia about the details, claiming trauma-induced memory loss. Christina played the grieving widow flawlessly, accepting condolences while Todd Taylor comforted her with appropriate restraint. From Alexander's vantage point in the Olympic Sculpture Park, the performance was masterful. Christina wore black Prada, her tears precisely timed for maximum effect. Todd delivered a eulogy that painted Alexander as a hero while subtly establishing Todd's credentials to inherit the business. Quite a show, Raphael Clark said, appearing beside Alexander like a ghost. The private investigator had been instrumental in staging Alexander's death and documenting his enemy's next moves. Any surprises? Your wife cleaned out your personal accounts the day after you were declared missing in action. Todd filed paperwork to assume control of the company within 48 hours. They're not even pretending to grieve privately. Alexander lowered the binoculars, his face carved from stone. And the government contracts? Werner Taylor Enterprises is already bidding on your classified projects. They're using your security clearances and operational knowledge to undercut competitors. Conservative estimate? They'll have stolen $12 million in contracts by year-end. Perfect. Alexander's smile was winter itself. Let them get comfortable. The plan had crystallized during his rescue flight from Afghanistan. Killing Christina and Todd would be satisfying but temporary. Alexander wanted something more elegant. He wanted to destroy them the same way they'd tried to destroy him. Slowly, completely, with the full knowledge that their destruction was coming. Phase 1 begins tomorrow, Alexander continued. Are our assets in place? Raphael nodded. Stephanie Morse has been hired as Christina's new assistant. She's former CIA, completely loyal to us. Marcus Hand is positioned at the Pentagon to monitor which classified contracts Todd is trying to access. And Mitchell Carey has been watching the Werner family compound for 3 days. Alexander had spent 2 weeks assembling his revenge network. Former military contacts who owed him favors. Intelligence operatives looking for freelance work. Business associates who'd been betrayed by competitors and wanted their own justice. What about Jonathan? Your brother is exactly where you left him. Officially recovering from his injuries, but actually serving as our inside source. His guilt over the conspiracy has made him completely cooperative. Alexander felt no satisfaction in his brother's remorse. Jonathan had been manipulated by Edwin Werner for years. His grief over their father's death carefully shaped into a weapon against Alexander. The real architects of the conspiracy were Todd and Christina. Any word from our financial specialist? Brian Walker has been monitoring their accounts. Christina thinks she's hidden her stolen assets, but Brian's tracking every transaction. When you're ready to move, we can seize everything. Alexander checked his watch. Christina and Todd would be returning to their love nest after the memorial service, celebrating their successful performance. By now, they probably believe they'd won. Tonight, they sleep peacefully for the last time, Alexander said. Tomorrow, we begin teaching them about consequences. Christina Knowles-Ney Werner stood in the mirror of Todd Taylor's Kirkland apartment, removing her black memorial dress. The performance had been exhausting, but necessary. Playing the grieving widow required emotional energy she didn't actually feel. You were magnificent today, Todd said, appearing behind her in the mirror. His hands settled on her shoulders, and Christina allowed herself to lean back against him. Alex always said I should have been an actress. They've been planning this moment for 3 years. The memorial service was their graduation ceremony, the final step in becoming the people they'd always deserved to be. Rich, powerful, free from Alexander's suffocating righteousness. Any regrets? Todd asked, his lips brushing her neck. Only that we waited so long. Christina turned in his arms, studying his face. What about you? He was your friend. Alexander Knowles was never my friend. He was my commanding officer who got all the credit for missions I planned. He was the golden boy who got promoted while I stayed in the background. He was the man who got everything I wanted, including Christina. Todd had been in love with her since their first meeting, but she'd been focused entirely on Alexander. The bigger prize, the better target. Well, now you have everything, Christina said, kissing him deeply. The company, the contracts, the money. And me. And tomorrow we make it official. I file the final paperwork to rename the company. You file the insurance claims. By next week, we'll be the wealthiest security contractors on the West Coast. Christina smiled, thinking of the numbered accounts holding Alexander's money, the life insurance policies that would pay out millions, the contracts Todd was already negotiating with her government contacts. She went to bed that night, dreaming of the life she'd finally earned. She woke up to find her apartment surrounded by FBI agents. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Christina Werner, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit treason. FBI agent Diana Sullivan stood in the doorway of Todd's apartment, warrant in hand, while a dozen agents moved through the rooms with practiced efficiency. Christina sat up in bed, her mind racing. There's been a mistake. My name is Christina Knowles, and I'm a widow. My husband died 3 weeks ago. Your husband died in Afghanistan, Agent Sullivan agreed. But not the way you think. Alexander Knowles survived his capture and provided extensive testimony about your conspiracy before agreeing to enter witness protection. The words hit Christina like physical blows. Alexander was alive. Alexander knew everything. Alexander had betrayed them the same way they betrayed him. Where's Todd? Christina demanded. Mr. Taylor is currently being arrested at his office. We've also arrested Edwin Werner, Jonathan Knowles, and 12 other individuals connected to your network. Through the apartment's windows, Christina could see news vans gathering. By noon, the story would be everywhere. The grieving widow who'd actually conspired to murder her war hero husband. I want a lawyer. You'll need one. The charges include conspiracy to commit murder, treason, fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to sell classified information to foreign agents. As the FBI agents led Christina away in handcuffs, she caught a glimpse of a familiar figure across the street. Alexander Knowles stood beside a black SUV, very much alive, watching her destruction with cold satisfaction. Their eyes met through the apartment window. Alexander didn't smile or wave or show any emotion at all. He simply watched as the woman who'd promised to love him until death was dragged away to face the consequences of her choices. Todd Taylor's arrest happened at the Knowles Security Solutions office, in front of every employee. Alexander had choreographed the timing perfectly. Todd was in the middle of a staff meeting, explaining the company's transition to new leadership when federal agents surrounded the building. Todd Taylor, you're under arrest. Todd tried to run. Actually tried to fight his way through the agents to reach the building's rear exit. It took 4 men to subdue him, and by the time they had him in handcuffs, he was screaming Alexander's name like a curse. He's supposed to be dead. Alexander Knowles is dead. Mr. Knowles is very much alive. Agent Sullivan informed him, and he's provided evidence of your 3-year conspiracy to steal classified information and murder American citizens. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showing Todd's illegal income. Communication logs proving his contact with foreign agents. Video footage from the Afghan compound showing Todd coordinating with Edwin Werner. And most damning of all, recorded conversations where Todd explicitly discussed murdering Alexander. Mitchell Carey, who'd been acting as temporary company manager, addressed the stunned employees after Todd's arrest. Effective immediately, Alexander Knowles resumes full control of this company. He's alive, he's safe, and he's coming home. Alexander watched Todd's arrest from the company's parking garage, speaking with Raphael Clark on an encrypted phone. Werner's been arrested at his Bellevue mansion, Raphael reported. The FBI found $2 million in cash, classified military documents, and communications equipment linked to foreign intelligence services. What about the others? All 12 co-conspirators are in custody. The government officials who leaked information, the business rivals who funded the conspiracy, the foreign agents who bought intelligence. Everyone who touched this operation is going down. Alexander felt a profound satisfaction, not just at his enemy's defeat, but at the completeness of their destruction. By tonight, Todd and Christina would be in federal holding cells. Edwin Werner would be facing life in prison for treason. The business they tried to steal would be restored to Alexander's control. There's one more thing, Raphael said carefully. Jonathan wants to see you. Alexander's brother was being held at a federal facility in Tacoma, officially under arrest, but actually in protective custody. Jonathan's cooperation had been essential to documenting the conspiracy, but Alexander hadn't spoken to him since Afghanistan. Schedule it for tomorrow. I have other priorities tonight. Alexander's most important priority was a visit to the Bellevue home he'd shared with Christina for 8 years. The house where she'd lied to him every night for 3 years. The house where she'd planned his murder while cooking him dinner. the house where Alexander Knowles intended to reclaim everything that had been stolen from him. Chapter 9. Justice Served. Alexander stood in the foyer of his Bellevue mansion, surrounded by 8 years of married life. Wedding photos smiled down from the walls. Alexander in his dress uniform, Christina radiant in white, both of them playing roles they'd never truly inhabited. The FBI had secured the house as a crime scene, but Alexander's government connections had granted him one final visit before the property was permanently seized as evidence. Raphael Clark moved through the rooms with a handheld scanner, locating and cataloging the surveillance equipment Christina had hidden throughout the house. Cameras in the bedroom, audio pickups in your office, keystroke loggers on your computers, Raphael reported. Your wife was running a comprehensive intelligence operation against you. Alexander wasn't surprised. He was studying Christina's home office, understanding now why she'd always been so interested in his work. Maps covered one wall, marked with government facility locations and operational timelines. A locked filing cabinet contained copies of classified documents that should never have left Alexander's office. How long do you think she was planning this? Based on the documentation we've found, since before you met her, Christina Werner was recruited by foreign intelligence services specifically to target you. The marriage was always a professional operation. Alexander sat down at Christina's desk, opening her laptop. She hadn't expected to be arrested, so her files were unencrypted. Email chains with Todd discussing operational details. Financial spreadsheets tracking stolen money. Research files on Alexander's psychological profile, family history, and personal vulnerabilities. One folder was labeled Contingency Plans. Alexander opened it and found detailed scenarios for disposing of him if the Afghan operation failed. Staged accidents, apparent suicides, medical emergencies that would leave no evidence of foul play. She really was thorough, Alexander said quietly. There's something else you should see. Raphael led Alexander to the master bedroom, where he'd found a hidden wall safe behind their wedding portrait. Inside were documents that made Alexander's blood run cold. Birth certificates, death certificates, multiple passports with different names, complete fabricated identities for both Christina and Todd, ready to be activated if they needed to disappear. Jesus, Alexander breathed. They weren't just planning to steal my business. They were planning to vanish. Gets worse. Look at the dates on these documents. They were prepared 18 months ago, long before the Afghan operation. They were always planning to disappear, which means they were always planning to kill you. Alexander closed the safe and walked to the bedroom window overlooking Elliott Bay. This had been his favorite view in the house. The sunset over the water, the distant mountains, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the evening darkness. Now it just looked like a stage set from a life that had never been real. His secure phone rang. Mitchell Carey's number. The news broke an hour ago, Mitchell reported. Every major outlet is running the story. War hero survives wife's murder plot. Christina and Todd are front page news, and not in a good way. What about the business? Stock price jumped 30% when a market learned you were alive. Government contracts are secure. Employee morale is through the roof. Everyone's excited to have you back. Alexander smiled for the first time in weeks. Schedule a company meeting for tomorrow morning. I want to address everyone personally. Will do. And Alex, it's good to have you back. After hanging up, Alexander took one final walk through the house. In his office, he removed a few personal items. His father's Bronze Star, photos of him and Jonathan during better times, the Colt .45 his grandfather had carried in Korea. Everything else could burn for all he cared. At the front door, Alexander paused beside a wedding photo, showing him and Christina cutting their cake. Young, happy, apparently in love. He believed in that moment with every fiber of his being. Now he understood it had been performance art. Alexander left the house keys on the foyer table and walked away from 8 years of lies. The federal courthouse in downtown Seattle was surrounded by media when Christina's arraignment began. Alexander sat in the gallery, watching his wife enter the courtroom in orange prison garb and shackles. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The confident, beautiful woman who'd manipulated him for years was gone, replaced by a frightened prisoner facing life in federal prison. Christina's eyes found Alexander in the courtroom. For a moment, their gazes held. Alexander saw desperation in her expression, a last, silent plea for mercy or forgiveness. Alexander's face remained stone. The charges were read: conspiracy to commit murder, treason, espionage, fraud, money laundering. The evidence was overwhelming. The government was seeking life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Christina's lawyer requested bail. The request was denied. She would remain in federal custody until trial, which was scheduled for 6 months away. As the hearing concluded, Christina was led away in chains. She tried to turn back toward Alexander one final time, but the bailiffs forced her to keep moving. Alexander watched until she disappeared through the prisoner transport door. Alexander found Jonathan in the federal facility's visitor room 3 days later. His younger brother looked older somehow, marked by guilt and the knowledge of what his betrayal had cost both of them. "How are you holding up?" Alexander asked. "Better than I deserve." Jonathan's voice was quiet, ashamed. "The prosecutor says I'll probably get 2 years if I continue cooperating. Could have been life." "What you did was wrong," Alexander said carefully. "But Edwin Werner spent 15 years poisoning you against me. You were manipulated. That doesn't excuse it." They sat in silence for several minutes. Two brothers separated by betrayal, but connected by blood. "What happens now?" Jonathan finally asked. "You serve your time. You get out. You rebuild your life." Alexander's voice was firm. "But Jonathan, this is the last time you get forgiveness from me. Betray me again, and I'll destroy you as completely as I destroyed the others." Jonathan nodded, understanding. "And us? Are we still brothers?" Alexander considered the question carefully. Trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. But family was family, and Jonathan had ultimately chosen to help Alexander survive rather than watch him die. "We're brothers," Alexander said finally. "But we're not friends. Not anymore." It was the best he could offer, and they both knew it. 6 months later, Alexander stood in another courthouse as the verdicts were read. Christina Werner, guilty on all counts. Life imprisonment without parole. Todd Taylor, guilty on all counts. Life imprisonment without parole. Edwin Werner, guilty on all counts. Death penalty. Alexander felt no joy in their destruction, only a cold satisfaction that justice had been served. They tried to destroy him, and instead they destroyed themselves. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Alexander as he walked to his car. "Mr. Knowles, do you feel vindicated by today's verdicts?" "Justice has been served," Alexander said simply. "What's next for you and your company?" "We're stronger than ever. Knowles Security Solutions will continue serving our country and protecting American interests around the world." "Any final words about your wife's betrayal?" Alexander paused, looking directly into the camera. "I learned a valuable lesson about trust. I won't be making that mistake again." 5 years later, Alexander Knowles stood in his new office overlooking downtown Seattle. Knowles Security Solutions had tripled in size since the trial, becoming the premier military contractor in the Pacific Northwest. Alexander had remarried, a fellow veteran who understood the costs of service, and built a life based on truth rather than deception. Sometimes he thought about Christina, spending the rest of her life in a federal penitentiary. Sometimes he wondered if she ever regretted her choices, or if she was still convinced she'd been justified in trying to destroy him. It didn't matter. Christina Werner was dead to him, as completely as if he'd put a bullet in her head himself. Alexander Knowles had learned the most important lesson of his life. When someone betrays you, you don't forgive them. You make them pay, and you make sure they never forget the price of crossing a man who keeps his promises, especially the promise of revenge. The war hero had survived. His enemies had not. Justice, Alexander reflected, was the most beautiful thing in the world when it finally arrived. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.